Welcome to the final webinar in our Domestic Violence Awareness Month series, Recognizing the Signs of Teen Dating Violence. I am Amy Gall, and I'm the Director of Education for the Partnership for Maternal and Child Health of Northern New Jersey. The partnership is providing today's program. Just a few pieces of information before I introduce our speaker. The speaker and planners have no relevant conflicts of interest to disclose. To receive a certificate of completion, you must listen to the entire webinar and complete the evaluation survey. A link to that survey will arrive via email within an hour after the webinar ends. Certificates of completion will be sent via email next week. This program is being recorded and will be available via the Partnership's on-demand education page until October 28th, 2022. Although we've muted all of the attendees' microphones during the presentation, we encourage you to enter questions in the question box, and our speaker will address as many as possible at the conclusion of her presentation. And now I'd like to present Kristin Wald, who is an educator who has been working with both teenagers and adults. She has an undergraduate degree from Ithaca College and a Master's of Science in Education from my alma mater, Binghamton University. She has been a domestic violence awareness workshop leader for Start Out Fresh Intervention Advocates, SOFIA, since 2015. In this role, Kristin leads discussions, shares information, and addresses concerns and questions regarding issues surrounding recognizing signs, helping others, helping oneself, and navigating the effects of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Kristin currently serves as the Vice President of the Board for SOFIA. Kristin will now be teaching us about healthy and unhealthy relationships in teens, recognizing the signs.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who is here to listen and learn. As she said, my name is Kristin Wald, and I say we get started. So I will hide myself if I can. Okay, so I think this is okay. And I just wanted to let everyone know a little bit about SOFIA. We are a nonprofit. We're very grassroots, we're very small. We're based in Montclair, New Jersey, but we serve all of Essex County as well as Bergen, Hudson, and we travel all around the state to Ocean to Suffolk, where anyone wants us. We are focused on support and healing of those who are affected by domestic violence. So that includes women, men, families, and friends and family of people who have been directly affected. My name is Kristin Wald. I'm Vice President of the SOFIA Board. I'm a certified domestic violence response team member and workshop facilitator. And we always like to share that the reason that SOFIA exists, and we just passed our 10-year anniversary, is because we had a tragic circumstance occur in Montclair in 2008, where a young mother of two was sitting and watching one of her children take swimming lessons, and she was sitting next to her older child, her daughter, and her ex-boyfriend, the father of the kids, just walked into the YMCA and shot her. And our founder, Cynthia Walker, felt like there really was a need to get out more support and information to the community, because the shock felt like no one could believe this could happen here. And so, you know, we knew it could. We knew that we all know someone. And so she started SOFIA to get out that information on a very grassroots and community level. I also want to start with some caveats. We do all know someone who is in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, even if we don't know that. This could even be our own self, and that can sometimes come as a realization to people when they hear information about domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Many of us may have been involved with abusers, and some of us may have been abusers in the past. Realizing this can be immediate, can happen right away, or it can take years and years before someone realizes that their relationship goes under the title of abusive. We always encourage empathy for those who come forward. It's an essential part of growth. And so rule 1 is always to listen to both yourself and other people without judgment when they talk about their relationships. And rule 2 is also to be kind and forgiving of yourself. So we always have immediate responses when someone comes to us with a problem, and sometimes that may not be a response we feel good about. So be kind to yourself. Know that we're all human and we make mistakes, and it's okay to go back and apologize, and then to do better. So as you've probably heard in the past and during this month, the definition of relationship abuse and domestic violence includes a pattern of destructive behavior that's used to exert both power and control over a dating partner, a spouse, a former partner. It could be someone that you share a child with, it could be someone that you lived with, or someone that you've just gone on dates with. It usually involves a series of abusive relationships, abusive behaviors that have happened over a course of time. And that pattern can be very fast. It can be a daily pattern, or the pattern can be something that happens once a month, or just at the holidays, or when family gets together, when there's stress in other parts of someone's life. But it's always a pattern. It's something that happens repetitively. That kind of abuse can involve money. It can be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, digital or on the internet abuse, or a combination of all of these. What we're often used to seeing is the physical. That's what happens in Hollywood movies. That's what happens in TV shows. Even pamphlets and flyers that many groups use focus on the physical because we can see it. However, you should know that approximately 98% of domestic and interpersonal abuse involves financial abuse. There's almost always some level of abuse that involves bank accounts, hurting someone's income, stealing money from someone, making it impossible for them to earn, some kind of financial abuse. And we'll talk about some of those as well. Specific to adolescents, they often don't recognize abusive behaviors as abusive. You know, one of the things that we are sometimes told as children when we're in elementary school even is that, oh, well, if he's pulling your pigtails or if he's pinching you, he must like you. And that kind of attitude can translate into later thinking that any kind of attention is positive attention. And so one of the things that we do with our superhero workshops, which have young children, usually up until the age of 12, we always focus on feeling good about yourself, your ego, feeling good about who you are, and making sure that their idea of their own self is very strong, because adolescents will often translate any kind of attention as positive attention, even when it hurts them, either physically or emotionally. So some of the warning signs that we ask young people in our workshops to look for we try to make them as relevant as possible. And so one of the places that we find really great information is the website loveisrespect.org. It's focused on young people, young adults and teenagers, and it uses language that's a little bit more, don't want to just say young, but a little bit more relatable for modern teens, let's say. So some of the 10 warning signs that we discuss are if someone that you're dating or someone that you're in a serious relationship with checks your cell phone or your email without permission. And often, you know, people will hand their phone to someone, look at this, take a look at this picture, take a look at this meme, and so on. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when someone will check your text messages or go into your email and look at who you've been texting, who you've been emailing, and doing that without your knowledge, so without your permission. And of course, you don't want friends to do that either, so that goes for them as well. Another warning sign that we ask people to look for is if someone's constantly putting you down. In most relationships, everyone has a bad day. Someone may, just want to say something that doesn't feel good. And that's why the constantly is very important, because we also don't want people to go on the other end of recognizing warning signs and thinking every time someone says something mean that that's abuse. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So the constantly putting you down, and this goes double if it's in public. So if someone is putting their dating partner or their spouse or their long-term relationship, putting them down in front of their friends and laughing and encouraging others to laugh, that's a real warning sign, because that's about derision and it's about breaking down someone's ego. If someone just says, oh, that outfit doesn't look great on you, that's a little bit different, especially if it's in private. If it's in public, we want to think about it a little more deeply. Having extreme jealousy and showing extreme insecurity. This is one of the places, especially that teenagers will have some trouble with, because someone being jealous feels like admiration. It feels like love. So we talk about that extreme jealousy goes into the phase of if you really have no reason to be jealous, and yet you consistently find ways to be jealous. And that can be abusive, because that means that the other partner needs to always be walking on eggshells, may even separate him or herself from their friends, or especially if it's someone that they think they might be attracted to. And insecurity of the abuser goes hand in hand with that. They don't feel good about themselves, and so they're always looking for someone else that might be better, that they think you like better. So those two things go hand in hand. And again, it's extreme jealousy. It doesn't matter if someone says, oh, well, do you think that guy likes you? That's not extreme jealousy. But someone flying off the handle, someone always saying, I think you're into somebody else, constantly doing that, that's where those red flags start to come up. And again, it does go hand in hand with an explosive temper. Someone goes 0 to 60 immediately, no warning signs of being angry or upset or having a bad day, and suddenly they're very, very angry. That kind of unexpected response. Again, everyone has a bad day. Sometimes we do fly off the handle, but when it becomes a repetitive situation, or when it's something that harms or goes together with one of these other signs, it's a big problem. When someone isolates a partner from his or her family or friends, that's part of grooming. It's part of separating them from support systems. So I only want to spend time with you. I don't like your friends. Your mom doesn't like me. Let's not go to your house. Those kinds of situations can, on the one hand, feel like, oh, you only want to spend time with me. That feels very romantic. But on the other hand, it also means that my friends are annoyed because I never spend time with them. My mother, she doesn't know anything about you because she's never met you. And it starts to become a very lonely place. This is part of making sure that the person who is being abused depends on the abuser. And so when you feel like your friend or your family member, you're seeing less and less of them, sure, it could be that they're falling in love, but it's also a sign, especially when it's connected with other warning signs, that something could be going on, especially if they're making excuses for the other person. Making false accusations goes together with the jealousy and insecurity. It could also be, you told me you were going to go to work, but I saw you shopping, or I thought you were going out with your friend Denise, but I saw you with Susan. That kind of thing is part of doing it constantly, is part of also preparing someone to be groomed for further abuse. Mood swings, we don't really need to explain that, but we all have them at times. Again, when it's connected to many of these other things, the unexpected mood swings, suddenly being very loving and kind, but then going back to being angry that you wore something attractive to go out with your friends. Those kinds of back and forth mood swings can also be a warning sign. Physically hurting a partner in any way. This is the one out of this list that if it happens, that can be a complete warning sign by itself. It doesn't need to be connected with anything else. Sometimes things may be pushed off as an accident or a mistake. You get tripped up the stairs or down the stairs. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But if that happens once a week between a couple, then it starts to become a real problem. And physically hurting you in any way can include a grab, a pull of the hair, blocking you from leaving a room, which can also be something that puts you in danger. Obviously, an open or closed hand hitting you along any of those things. So that's the one warning sign that we always tell teens. If there's something physical going on, that's something that someone has had to think about, to plan, and to react. So it involves both the explosive temper, the constantly putting you down. All those things are part of physical abuse. So we do warn people about that. Possessiveness, again, goes into some of the other examples. But again, that's one of those that can feel very, very romantic. You only want to be with me. You know, you love me so much that you don't want to share me and all of that. But it becomes a very obtrusive way to live. And of course, telling you what to do. You know, drop out of this club, join the club that I'm in, or don't join any clubs. Let's just be together after school for younger kids. And then for young adults, you know, we're not going out tonight, or we are going out tonight. Maybe you have a college exam the next morning, but your partner says, no, let's go out partying. My friends are going to get us in for free. And it ends up affecting your exam the next day, not respecting your own boundaries, but wanting to do what he or she wants to do. So these kinds of warning signs are general, but what we do with a group of students is that we ask them to think about examples of each one. And usually they come up with a lot of really real life examples. And this is usually where a lot of the students will start to think, oh, you know, my cousin had a relationship like that. Oh, my sister or my best friend, or that's why my friend hasn't contacted me for so long. And they start to recognize some of those areas as well. Why is this important? Well, 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States is a victim of physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner. That's a lot of adolescents. And again, that can be verbal abuse, putting that person down in public. It could be emotional, breaking down their ego, making them feel bad about themselves. Sexual assault is a part of some of these relationships as well. Pushing someone to do something they're not ready for, pushing someone to do something in a way that they're not ready for, that they don't want, whether or not they use prophylactics. All of those things are part of being in an abusive relationship. And we've discussed physical as well, of course. The severity of intimate partner violence, again, this is why this is so important, is often much greater in cases where it started in adolescence. So if someone is in their first dating relationship, maybe they're 12, 13, 14, and they have a relationship that has perhaps some fairly vague sorts of abuse. Maybe it's just putting the person down once in a while. Maybe they grab them once by the arm. But if that starts early, statistics show that it gets worse and worse over time. So if at 14 you dated someone who used to grab you by the arm to get you to go somewhere, then maybe at 16, it doesn't seem so bad when someone does something similar, and then it gets worse. So we always try to educate teens and even preteens when they're very young to be able to recognize those signs and not just think that's a part of what relationships are like. Only about 33% of teens who are in a violent relationship ever told anyone about the abuse. And that's a shocking statistic for someone who, you know, has children, for someone who, you know, may have experienced that in the past. You know, and usually at this point, our presenters will share something personal if they want to, or something that they've heard about. I will tell you that when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I was dating someone who did hit me across the face, and I broke up with him, but then all of my friends wanted me to keep going to the prom with that person. And so part of it is also our education is about educating friends and family that you don't push someone to do something when they've told you that there was some kind of violence in their relationship. And again, this happens a lot. You know, if 33% of teens don't tell us about it, but we know that about that same number, 33%, are going through it, that's a huge number that we never hear anything from. So we really try to emphasize that you want to keep your eyes on your friends for more than just, you know, if they're going to the bathroom by themselves. You want to make sure to keep your eye on them for all of their interactions with people. And again, I always like to put the idea of consent into presentations because adolescents need to hear it, but so do adults. And people don't like to talk about it because it's a very big gray area. Back in the 80s, it used to be no means no. And okay, we understand that, no means no. But the fact is that it's a lot more complicated than just no means no for consent, especially when dealing with sexual situations, but it can also be in any parts of your life. So adolescents tend to see the world yes or no, black or white, up or down. They don't tend to see a lot of those gray areas and more opaque areas. And because consent is so complicated, we like to use this example, it comes from Planned Parenthood, and it uses the acronym FRIES. And we give that definition, especially for young people, but it's good for everyone, that consent to something should be freely given, not coerced. I'm not trying to trade something else for it. I'm not trying to, you know, convince you to do something or bribe you to do something. Consent can be reversible. If I decide that I'm not so sure about that anymore, that's also okay. And that's one of the areas that a lot of teens especially, but adults too, have a hard time with. Oh, but you said you were going to. In a contract, maybe that's correct. But when it comes to your own body and your own autonomy, you get to decide what you're comfortable with no matter when it is. So we do talk about how consent can be reversible, and no one is going to, you know, explode. No one is going to pass on because they were told no in the middle of some kind of act. So that's what we talk about too with the teens. Consent should be informed. You should know what you're getting into. You should know what the limitations are, what people's boundaries are. This includes prophylactic use. It includes what kinds of actions people are going to take, and it includes anything about a relationship. And while we do use this in usually dealing with intimate relationships, it can go for a relationship in general as well. So it should be informed. You should know what you're getting into. And enthusiastic, not dragging your feet, being happy about what you're going to do, and also very specific. So if I say yes to having sex, that doesn't mean I'm saying yes to any kind of sex. It doesn't mean I'm saying yes to whatever you decide you want to do in the middle of it. And that's again where that reversible might come in. So we always talk about consent with young people, and this is one other way to heighten their autonomy, to heighten their confidence in themselves, and to make sure that they know that they are in charge of their own bodies. And so we do like to go over this in all of our presentations as well. Everyone should know that relationships, for the most part, exist on a spectrum. We can probably all think about friendships or intimate relationships, family relationships that slide back and forth between this spectrum. So a healthy relationship has strong communication, you're respectful of each other, you trust each other, you're honest, you treat each other as equals, you enjoy your personal time, whether it's alone or together, and that sounds pretty wonderful. But there are always times in relationships that maybe you don't discuss all of your problems, or you say something that's pretty disrespectful to someone else about their job or about themselves, that you might tell a lie, either to cover up for someone or to take care of someone's feelings. So you see how things can move back and forth. That doesn't mean you have to stay in the unhealthy column. You can go back to the healthy column. When it becomes abuse, again, when it's a pattern, and it occurs again and again, the not communicating and not discussing becomes communicating in a way that is hurtful, that is demeaning. Not showing disrespect to someone becomes actively trying to disrespect someone. The physical hurting. And again, the things listed under physical hurting are important. It's not just hitting or punching. It's also slapping, it's choking, which is a huge, strangulation is a huge warning sign for life-threatening situations. Pushing, shoving, blocking a door, all of those things are part of that. The dishonesty becomes blaming the person, trying to control the person, and pressuring someone to do things they don't want to do, as opposed to just wanting to spend time with your partner. So again, you might have one of the issues that show up in the abusive column, but then it slides back into unhealthy or even back to healthy. But we try to explain to people you don't have to always be in that orange abusive area to call it abusive. There might be some areas that are actually quite positive in your relationship, but it should be seen as a warning sign if you end up in the abusive or even the unhealthy column in your relationships once in a while. So one of the areas that we do have some discussions about are how is an abusive relationship abusive when it doesn't necessarily involve physical violence. And I do want to clarify that this hashtag, which comes out of Twitter, it says maybe he doesn't hit you, but frankly, I prefer if it was maybe they don't hit you, because it can be a he or a she, it could be anyone who behaves in an abusive manner. So I ask everyone to kind of replace the he with they, because it really, I don't want you to think about it as just a male thing, because you know, everyone is capable of being abusive. But what we do like about this hashtag is that people often say, oh, well, no, it couldn't have been abusive because they never hit me. They never touched me. But that doesn't mean that a relationship is not necessarily abusive. Emotional scars can be just as difficult. So things like emotional and verbal abuse can be used to groom someone, to make them feel stupid, to make them feel insecure, ugly, they can't do anything right, they're dependent just on that abuser, no one else will love them, they're very helpless by themselves. And over time, that victim may believe that the abuse is normal, that they deserve it, that it's part of a serious relationship. And that sets them up for it getting worse and worse over time. Something that we often hear from clients is that they came to believe they could not survive without their abuser. They could not balance a checkbook without the help of an abuser. They couldn't take care of the kids properly without help. They couldn't get to work on time without their help. Really small and really big things can go under this. And so some of the examples that we see in a public forum like Twitter is that maybe he doesn't hit you, but he makes sure you believe that you're too broken and damaged to ever be wanted by anyone else. No one else could possibly love you. I'm the only one that can love you like this. And we do hear that a lot. Maybe he doesn't hit you, but belittles your mental illness, makes you feel terrible about things you cannot control. And again, that's something that we hear a lot. If someone has depression, maybe postpartum depression, maybe depression related to puberty, adolescence, issues with his or her body, all of those things, someone who's an abuser will hone in on that and use that as a way to get in to someone's mind. So belittling mental illness. And I do want to point out, since we have a lot of people here who are thinking about going into the medical field, that one of the ways that abusers control their victims with mental illness is to either hide, throw away, or make it almost impossible for them to take their medication on time or at all. And we've had some clients who had a situation where the abuser made them come to him every time they had to take a pill. And so they had to go and ask for it. And they had to go and, maybe do something in order to get their medication. And so for someone who is mentally ill and maybe doesn't even like to take their medication, doesn't make them feel good, that's going to be a huge barrier to taking it regularly and staying mentally healthy. The last example that we have here is maybe he doesn't hit you, but he calls you 40 times a day when you choose not to answer the phone. And again, especially with adolescents, we hear that a lot with texting, that it's a constant If you don't get back to them right away, constant go, 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 text after text after text. And, you know, in my former life as a high school teacher, we often had students who, if we had to take away their phone because they were using it during class, would get very upset. No, 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 miss, I have to have it. I have to get back to him right away or he'll get really mad. Again, that's a red flag. If you have to interrupt your life to get back to someone because you're afraid of their response, that should be something that we pay attention to. So we do like to use the examples, but again, I just want you to keep in mind that women are just as capable of doing this kind of abuse as anyone else. So how do we help someone that we believe is in an abusive relationship? Number one, always, is to listen, let them share, let them talk. If someone comes to you and is willing to speak to you or willing to discuss, let them speak. A lot of people in helping professions want to go in and solve the problem. That's natural. So you might interrupt, you might say, oh, I'm so sorry, like that. But every kind of response, especially with someone who's been groomed in an abusive relationship, is going to be seen as judging. So just listen, just let them talk. And be supportive no matter what their choice is. If they choose to go back to their abuser, I'm still going to be here for you. Let me know when you're ready to talk some more. And not say, oh, I can't believe you're going back to that person. Because again, that's the judgment that we want to avoid. If it sounds like they're doing something that might really harm him or her, that may be different. But if it's something about going back to where they're comfortable right now, just kind of stretching and then going back to where they were, we need to just be supportive so that they feel free to come back to you when they are ready to go. You want to seek resources for the person or with the person. Many times seeking information on a phone or on a computer that's in the home can be very dangerous, because if an abuser finds out that you're looking for information, it is a real strong reaction that we get. So if you look for resources for your friend, for your family member, for your client, look for resources with them sitting right next to you. That can be a huge help. Finding specific information on the computer can often be frustrating and overwhelming, especially if you're nervous that someone's going to walk in the room. So doing that work for them is priceless. And again, here are some of the resources. I know that this will be available later on, but Love is Respect is focused on young people, adolescents, and young adults. The hotline.org is the national hotline. And then, of course, we have another national group, and all three of these are fantastic. Some New Jersey specific programs are listed in this link right here, and it comes out of the state of New Jersey's website. You always want to focus on your friend, your client, your family member, and not on the abuser, because it's not about the abuser, it's about your friend. Oftentimes when we talk to adolescents and also young adults, their first initial reaction is, oh, I'm going to get that person. I'm going to show that person what I think about them. I'm going to post about them publicly. I'm going to go after them. I'm going to, do something embarrassing to them in front of their friends. But what we remind the people that we present to is that if you're doing that, chances are the payback is going to come back to your friend, not to you. So if you embarrass the abuser, and they know exactly why you might be doing that, they may do something at a higher level back to the person that they're dating or were recently dating. So we always say, focus on your friend. We know you want to act out. We know you want to show that you're such a good friend. The best way to do that is to focus just on your friend. Part of listening well is to reflect your friend's statement. Excuse me. Reflect your friend's statement back to him or her with clarity. So what I hear you saying is, or wow, I didn't realize you were going through this, and then say what you think they said. And always avoid comparison of something that was worse or not so bad. Sometimes what we want to do is say, oh, I went through the same thing. Excuse me. I went through the same thing. This can happen sometimes with health issues or in grief issues as well. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Oh, well, at least it's not as bad as my aunt. But of course, what that does is then deflect and make the person sometimes even feel guilty about feeling nervous, anxious, or upset, or feeling sorry for themselves. So avoid any kind of comparison that someone had it worse, someone had it not so bad as what you went through or someone you know went through. And of course, check back on your friend repeatedly, even if he or she does not get back to you, because often they may be embarrassed after they've shared something, they may be ashamed of what they shared, and so just check back on them. Hey, how you doing? I was thinking of you this morning. Do you want to go for coffee? Or these days, I guess, do you want to FaceTime? But always check back on them. Maybe put an alert in your phone that every Tuesday morning you'll text them. And they'll appreciate it. Even if they don't get back to you, they know you're there for when they're ready. So one of the more frustrating aspects of domestic violence and intimate partner violence is wondering why someone would stay in that relationship. And it's a legitimate question, because if someone has never been in an abusive relationship, you can't necessarily relate to that. And we always say, well, I wouldn't let that happen. I would never do that. So again, we use social media especially with our younger workshops. And we always talk about, sometimes there are high profile cases of people who went back to their abusers, even after a very public video or public story came out, or a photograph. And so we talk about, well, there are a lot of reasons why someone may go back. There are a lot of reasons why someone may stay with an abuser. And we should also know that it takes approximately, on average, 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship successfully. And that choice to leave is often the most dangerous time during an abusive relationship. So there are many reasons why someone may choose to put off leaving or even go back to someone after they've left. And the average is 7, and that's a lot. This can be really difficult for someone who has a client in a situation like this, for a friend or family member, because you may be tempted to throw up your hands and give up on that person. But just know that that is not unique. It's not something that only your friend or family member is going through. It is a very common thing to go back and forth. And again, just like the first thing, just listen and don't judge, because it's a really hard thing to withhold judgment when you see someone making choices that you think are really harmful to him or her. So in this case, and again, I apologize for the pronouns, it should be they, because again, men and women can do it too. It says, he said he would change. He promised it was the last time. I believed him and he lied. So again, that repetition of, I'm going to be better, I'm so sorry, I'm going to change, and it doesn't happen. Often the cycle of abuse does not end unless it's physically interrupted. Someone leaves, someone gets help, and so it's a frustrating situation. We do a project with people where we hand these out in the workshops and have them read it out loud, which is saying why I stayed. And some of the examples we have here are, I told myself it wasn't that bad yet. And these are real examples from Twitter with that hashtag. So from people who went through it. So I told myself it wasn't that bad yet. And for me, that's one of the saddest reasons, because it means that they know that it's bad and that they'll leave when it gets worse. And, you know, we just hope that they leave in good condition. I stayed because nobody believed such a well-respected man could be capable of such horrible things. And this is true often in relationships in high school and college as well, and with young adults, because someone presents themselves very respectably. They might be very popular. They might be on a team where they're very popular or part of the school community. They may just be someone that people see as very quiet, and there's no way that he or she could do something so bad. So nobody believed that such a well-respected person could be capable of that. And it's really hard if someone comes to you and says, I think this happened to me, and it ends up that nobody believes them. So that's something to really think about. Again, I stayed because I believed I deserved it. That's part of grooming. and make someone think that they deserve to be treated that way. And of course, no one does. No one deserves that. So that's also a very sad reason for me, because there's a lot of work to be done there. Let's see. Oftentimes we have people say, I stayed because my religious institution, whatever that is, does not believe in divorce. I stayed because it does not believe in, breaking up with someone over something like that. I stayed because I didn't get support. And so those kinds of things are very important. We often do presentations in places of worship for that very reason, because we talk to the leaders in a place of worship who do not want to think that their congregants are doing things like this to each other at home, but it is there. We all know someone who's in an abusive relationship. So we try to get into a lot of places of worship to discuss these kinds of things, and it's usually a very positive experience. Let's see, the one that's covered a little bit says, my word was my only evidence. I didn't have anything else to show. And this happens especially in situations where the physical violence may not be as deep, but there's a lot of emotional violence. There might be financial abuse as well. I stayed because everything was in his name: the lease, the bank account, the credit card, the car, the phone. This is a form of financial abuse. If someone has to receive an allowance, if someone has to ask for money every single time, that's a way of controlling, and that is a form of financial abuse. And of course, that means that if the other person who has everything in his or her name leaves, that the person who's abused has nothing. And that's one of the reasons that we have such a high rate of homelessness and poverty among people who have been domestic violence victims, because they literally have not been able to accrue any kind of assets. And the one that is kind of cut off in the picture says, because he told me if I left, he would kill me and he would kill himself, and I loved him. And again, one of the emotional abuse areas is the threat to harm him or herself. And people often don't see that as abusive, because, oh, well, the person is saying they're going to harm themselves, not me, but it's a form of control. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. That is a huge amount of pressure and guilt to put on someone, and it's definitely a form of control to keep someone in a relationship. And again, I just want to reiterate that both men and women are perfectly capable of that kind of emotional abuse. So, again, this is something that we do to share some reasons of why the people say they stayed, so that people get a better idea that it's not just one reason. It's not just physical threats or physical violence, although that is a big part of it, but that's there. We also don't include anything here in this particular picture about having children, or about being afraid for your family. Threats: if you leave, I will, hurt your mom. Or if you leave, I'll tell everyone what you did. If you leave, I'll show these pictures of you that I have, which is a form of digital abuse or internet abuse. So we do have a lot of other reasons that we talk about in our workshops, trying to help people find empathy for why someone may stay in a relationship. Now, of course, the question is, what if you care about the person who is the abuser? It could be your brother, it could be your aunt, it could be a friend of yours, someone you work with. What if you know the abuser? Do you just write that person off? Do you just, cut them off? What do you do? At SOFIA, we do not believe that once you have abused someone, that's the end all be all. We do believe that people can change. We do work sometimes with people who have been abusers and have gone through therapy. If someone enters the court system, they may be given anger management classes or domestic violence awareness classes, that sort of thing, as part of a court case. But oftentimes people never enter the court system. So what do you do? What if your friend is the abuser? Well, the first thing we tell people is, please don't ignore it. Please don't ignore it. If the person says, oh, you got to hear what I did, to my girlfriend last night. You got to hear what I made my boyfriend do, and then they say, and if it feels weird, if it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, say so. Don't ignore what you see. Don't ignore what you hear about. Remember, one of the 10 warning signs is if someone puts down their partner in public. If you are part of that public, say something. That's not cool. What a horrible thing to say. Why would you say that about someone you care about? Just pointing out that you don't agree with it, that you're not laughing along. And that's enough sometimes to make someone who may be on the road to being a real abuser stop and say, oh, you know what? That was a really horrible thing to say, and interrupt that as well. So just don't ignore it. Silence will help that person think that what they're doing is okay. They can't deny it if you've actually said that it's wrong. So don't ignore it. Don't support or minimize the abuse. The laughter we were talking about, don't make it seem like less, oh yeah, well, she's crazy anyway. Oh yeah, well, he's always been a little weird. You know, like, don't make excuses for the abuse. Just say nothing if you can't find anything else to say, but avoid allowing blame the victim statements to go unacknowledged. Oh, she made me so mad when I came home from work. I was so mad. Well, she didn't make you feel angry. You felt those things. And we try to really emphasize that you want to take responsibility for your actions and not always blame someone else for what you say or what you do. Of course, be supportive. Just like if you want to help someone who is being abused, go find the resources for them, because time is definitely of the essence. Have those resources ready. Make sure that you stay in touch with that person, check back with that person, let them know that you are there when they're ready to find help, and assure them that they can change. It's possible to change, it's possible to grow, it's possible to become better. And so, those are some of the things. And again, the same resources that I gave you before, they all have sections of what to do to help someone you think is an abuser. So please do visit those and check them out. Because just like we all know someone who is in an abusive relationship as a victim, then we all know someone who's also in an abusive relationship as the abuser. One thing that they asked me to speak about just very quickly is SOFIA's response during this time, during the age of COVID, especially during when we had a hard lockdown in New Jersey, and it looks like we may be headed that way again. But we quickly changed to, instead of doing in-person workshops, we did everything online. We used same kind of thing. We used Zoom, we used different Facebook Live, that sort of thing. We also created public service announcement videos that we asked our friends and partners, different community groups, to share videos about domestic violence, about some of the things people can watch for. We did a lot of sharing and resharing of resources, whereas usually we trust that people will be able to get out and about. Now we did it all over online, over our social media, and so on. As I said, we switched our workshops and all of our events to online, and we started, for direct services, we did what we called WeCare Deliveries of COVID-19 related items, hard to find items, including toilet paper, but we got wipes. We made large orders of toilet paper, paper towels, cleaning supplies. We got donations of sewn masks, and also we got disposable masks, gloves, and we also always added in something special, cards, journals, that sort of thing for people. And these are just some examples of how we did that. So these are some of our advocates. Sharon is on the left side, and we have Yaz that's on the right side. And so they shared things, and we made sure to share their personal videos as well. We shared these kinds of resources through our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and also we asked people that we work with to share it on their personal channels as well. When we switched those events to online, there was a benefit that a group did for us, some young people. They were fantastic, and they were able to just switch everything online instead of having it. We did our workshops for financial credit. The one in the middle is our Light Up the Night, where people purchased bags and candles to put out on one particular night around town and in front of their houses, which was both a fundraiser as well as an awareness raiser for us for that. So we just arranged to have things that were able to be done individually and also online. With the WeCare Deliveries, you can see we had supplies that we purchased through a grant and also through donations. And we made up bags and we delivered them to our clients that were all around Essex County and Bergen County and Hudson County. So we delivered these things to our clients. And people often said, well, why do you need to deliver these kinds of items to them? And part of it is because if someone needs to go to a food pantry, if someone needs to go to the one grocery store or the one supply store in their neighborhood, they may be afraid that their abuser is going to know they're going to go there. And it was really hard to find some of these items, especially early on. And we didn't want that anxiety of, I'm going to show up with my kids, he or she's going to see me there, and I don't want to have to see them on top of the other anxiety. So we really wanted to make sure that they had some basic necessities. We also transported some people to food pantries to pick up their food, and also to grocery stores at times. So we did everything as safely as we could, and it was contactless drop-off, and people really appreciated it. So I'm just including a slide that has a bunch of different references for things that we talked about. And I'm happy to listen to any questions. And I hope there are some. I hope I left enough time for that. Do I have to share my screen again? I think I do, right?
Yes.
Share my webcam.
Yep.
Did I do it? Okay.
You did it, Kristin. And thank you so much for that very thorough presentation. I particularly appreciate you sharing the awesome work that SOFIA is doing, and as well as including ways to try to support the abuser, because I think that that's often not addressed. So that's terrific. We do have some questions and we do have some time for them. So the first one is from Veronica, and she wants to know if SOFIA has volunteer opportunities available.
We do. We are tiny. But we rely, you know, I'm a volunteer. We rely on volunteers for a lot of things. We are located in Montclair, and right now is difficult because of social distancing and all of that. But we do love to have volunteers to help with putting together packages, putting together packets for workshops in quote unquote normal times. And of course, the other thing that everyone can do as a volunteer is if you go to our social media channels and just share our posts, because especially during October, we did a lot of informational posts. So, you know, that helps us to get the word out, and that's really what we're about. We want to try to eradicate the stigma of talking about intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So if you share that, I would really appreciate it. But you can write to info@supportsofia.org. And there are only 2 people who get those emails, so it won't get lost, but let them know that Kristin did a workshop and you'd like to know about volunteer opportunities.
Thank you. And now we have a question from Deanna. She said that sometimes, regarding leaving the abuser, many times the abuser knows where the person will go because they are aware of who's in the person's support system. Is it normal for friends and family to get a temporary restraining order against the abuser also? Should they notify the authorities on the actual day their loved ones leave the abuser?
Those are fantastic questions. Yeah, we didn't really have time to get into it, but it can be intimidating and dangerous for friends and family when someone leaves, especially if there is already a personal relationship between the abuser and the friends and family. So a temporary restraining order would probably only be granted if something has already happened. So you can't just do it in anticipation of something. But that does not mean that the victim couldn't get a temporary restraining order, and that would follow him or her wherever they go. So if they're staying with their friend, that means that it would be in action for that friend's home as well. So, you know, that it's always something that we encourage people to do. Getting a TRO is not as difficult as getting a permanent restraining order, because that can be quite difficult actually. But we do advise that people think about making arrangements for that. And that's one way you can help your friend or family member, is to get all that information together for them prior to trying to leave, and helping them plan a, you know, an emergency packet that has cash, their medications, that kind of thing, ready to go, so when they get a chance, they can leave.
Thank you. What if I offer help and it is rejected?
That's a real possibility. And that's part of why we try to emphasize remaining open and not taking a rejection personally, making sure that you can still be contacted if and when that person's ready to leave. It's really hard to accept help and to ask for help. I'm a Scorpio. It's very hard for me. But I think that if you offer it and say, listen, when you're ready, let me know, I'm here to help. Even if it's rejected, they'll know that you're still willing. And always to check back. You know, texting makes it a lot easier than it was 30 years ago, but just to text and say, hey, still thinking of you, that's something that will not tip off an abuser, you know, make it very casual, and it lets them know you're still there for them. But yeah, rejection is common because it's really hard to do that. And we always try to emphasize that the person who wants to leave the relationship may still be deeply in love with their abuser. And so that complicates matters as well. That's a great question.
Can you talk about some examples of physical abuse that are harder to identify?
Well, any kind of sexual abuse is harder to identify. Different kinds of physical abuse can be combined with intimidation. Putting the hand over the door jamb, for instance, and just blocking someone's way is technically a physical abuse, but it's also emotional abuse because it's about entrapment. But the physical abuse that's harder to identify is the kind that doesn't necessarily leave a mark. So sometimes abusers will know, and this is true for all types of physical abuse, child abuse as well, will know what to do that does not leave a bruise or a scrape or a scratch or a broken bone. Twisting of the arms, ankles, fingers, that kind of thing is something we often hear about, and you don't see that without an x-ray often. So that occurs frequently in child abuse as well. Things like pulling of hair also doesn't often leave a mark. So that can also be something that is a type of physical abuse. Throwing someone against a wall, any kind of abuse that would be covered by clothing is going to also be harder to see. And that's why we try to emphasize looking also for body cues as well. So if you go and you hug your friend and they kind of, you know, it's like, oh, what happened? Oh, it's nothing. You surprised me. And if that happens, sure, maybe you surprise them. But if it happens again and again, maybe start to wonder, is it because something hurts on their ribs? Ribs and kidneys are something we see a lot too. So there are a lot of places that people can be hurt without necessarily, you know, I don't like that movies always talk about black eyes or broken bones, you know, because that's not what we see most of, because people don't want to get caught. So that's a great question too. You guys are good.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. We've had a lot of positive comments about the webinar, and I just wanted to read you what one viewer wrote in. Laurel wrote, extremely informative. Thank you so much for the presentation today and your continued diligent effort to educate and protect those who suffer. So thank you so much. I think she summed it all up. We appreciate you being with us today. I'd also like to thank Laura Hall, who's been the woman working the back end of this program. She's done an amazing job, as always. Just a reminder to everyone who's listening that within the hour, you'll receive an email, and it will have a link to the post-program evaluation, and that certificates of completion will be sent to you next week in the body of an email. and we use the email that you provide on the evaluation. So please double check it, make sure there are no typos. Next week, we're delighted to be hosting a 2-hour webinar in collaboration with the Essex Union County Association of Psychologists. The program, The Psychological Birth of a Mother, is scheduled for Friday morning, November 6th at 9 a.m. More information about this program and other webinars, or to access our library of on-demand programs, is available if you go to the professional education page on the Partnerships website at www.partnershipmch.org. We've got some other exciting webinars coming up in November, including a program on adoption and some webinars on gestational diabetes and diabetes in children. We hope you will join us. Thank you.